All right. Well, let's move on to touch, taste, smell, and balance. All right. Sorry, I kicked my table and jiggled the whole camera. All right. So there are 4 components to touch. I mentioned this a little bit when we were on chapter 2, that there are different receptors for different kinds of touch sensations. We have certain sensory neurons that collect pressure, certain ones that collect warmth, others collect cold, and the 4th type is pain. So here's an interesting question. You can detect other kinds of touch than those 4 things, can't you? Warmth and cold. Where's hot? Where's wet? Right? These are things that you can detect. So how do you detect them? Well, through combinations of these cells or these fibers firing together. So pressure plus cold gives you wet. I discovered how true this is when I sat for the first time in a car that had cooling seats. I was in Phoenix, so I was very grateful for cooling seats. But I'll tell you what, when it first came on, I was like, did I spill something? Why does it suddenly feel like I'm sitting in wet? And I realized it's because I'm sitting on cool. Wet. Took me a few days of driving that rental car before I finally stopped, panicking and thinking I was sitting on something wet. How about hot? Turns out cold plus warm is detected by your brain as hot. Now that sounds kind of surprising. You might have thought it was warm and pain or warm and pressure or something. But let me give you a couple of examples and you'll believe it's true that cold plus warm makes hot. If you've ever taken your nice, warm, normal temperature hands and put them into cold water, it feels like it's burning, right? Warm plus cold makes hot. Or if you've ever gone outside and your hands got really cold and then you came into a normally heated room, just warm, felt like your hands were burning, right? Because cold hands plus warm room makes you feel like you're burning hot. So you've had experiences that really drive that warm plus cold home. But when you first hear it, you think, well, why wouldn't we just have a hot receptor? That doesn't make sense. But if you think about it, why not? Now we can have 2 receptors and also be able to convey this really important hot information. There's not a lot to say about touch. There are some really interesting things to think about with touch. Sometimes we feel something touching us and there really was nothing there. That's probably one of our touch receptors just sort of firing randomly, things like that. But as far as how touch actually works, there's not a lot to say. So moving on to taste. You probably learned that there are 4 basic tastes in high school. We've got sweet receptors that help to drive us towards things that will provide energy for us, right? Things that are sweet tend to have a lot of glucose that'll give us quick energy. We have other receptors that respond to sour, which will drive us towards beneficial acids, right? Things that carry vitamin C are usually acidy. Bitter receptors help to recognize potential poisons, so we will avoid those things. Salty receptors help to drive us towards things that are salty because we need those sodium ions to make our body retain water and things that we need. And then there's a 5th taste that recently they finally have agreed to. They've been talking about it since I was in college. They finally solidified it about, 15 years ago. And that is umami, which is savoriness. They have finally identified the receptors for umami. And these receptors really help to ensure that we will be motivated to eat protein-based nutrition. So you can kind of see all these taste receptors really helping to make sure that we eat a balanced diet that includes the things that we need and to avoid the things that might be possibly harmful. So you'll notice in the bitter potential poisons picture, there are things that we eat, olives and beer and things that we eat, coffee, chocolate. So clearly we can get over the tendency to detect bitter as poison. But something that's really important to know about taste is that little kids have underactive sweet receptors. So for them, it takes a lot of sweet for them to notice it as sweet. If you've ever watched a kid eat candy and you're like, how is that not just killing you? So much sweet. How can you take it? It's like sickeningly sweet and you still want to eat it. Kids have it takes more for them to detect it as sweet. And so they're not just being irresponsible or something. It actually doesn't taste as sweet as it does to a full-grown adult. Meanwhile, they have overactive bitter receptors. So it takes just a hint of bitter for a child to react and reject it. And so they don't like broccoli unless it's been prepared properly, right? Because otherwise, when they taste it plain, they're like, that is bitter, and they kick it out because it could potentially be a poison. Think how advantageous that is for a child to have overreactive bitter receptors when they're little and they don't know food from stuff they found on the floor, and they put things in their mouth. If it has a hint of bitter, it'll motivate them to spit it out, which could protect their lives. So it's a good thing that they have overreactive bitter receptors. As they age, they do start to moderate out, and it'll take less sweet for them to see it as a sweet thing. It'll take more bitter for them to reject it as a potential poison. So as we age, our taste buds literally do change. Your mom might have told you that, oh, try it again. You haven't tried it since you were little. Maybe your taste buds have changed. You think, that sounds like an old mom tale. I'm not buying it. Well, it turns out that your taste buds do actually mature, and you become less sensitive to bitter tastes. Interestingly, for babies, their preferred flavors are in this order: sweet, salty, sour, and then they absolutely just reject bitter. Now, I don't have good evidence on the umami taste with babies. I have not seen that literature, but the other order is very clear-cut. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Sweet, mom milk is about the sweetest thing you can taste. Salty, a lot of times mom tastes salty, right? Sour, that one's a little surprising that they would prefer sour to bitter, but it's not that they prefer sour. It's that they hate bitter. They just reject bitter. So it's not that they like sour, they just hate it less than they hate bitter. So taste is a chemical sense. It relies on molecules lodging in receptor sites on your tongue. What you're seeing here is a cross-section of papillae. So each of those little structures, hopefully you can see my arrow as I'm outlining one, but you've got this cavern between two of them, and then it goes up, and then it flattens out like a little plateau for a while, and then you get down to another cavern between two, and so on. All along the top, all along the caverns, these papillae are lined with taste buds. It's no longer believed that you have all your sweet receptors on the tip of your tongue and all your bitter receptors on the back of your tongue, and then the salty and the sour on the sides. They don't think that they're isolated like that anymore. They think every papilla could have any receptor. But each papilla has dozens of receptors. So you have all these places for molecules to lodge into the correct receptor and activate those taste reactions and send that message up to the brain. Another chemical sense is smell. So smell, just like taste, we have molecules that come into, in this case, your sinus cavity. And then they lodge in the olfactory receptors, which are these, in the right-hand side of the picture, they're in that pink layer. They're the little turquoise things. And you'll see that they're little appendages are sticking out the bottom. And those are covered in receptors for collecting different kinds of molecules. And then the information goes up through those nerve endings that have to cross through bone to get up to your olfactory bulb. And then your olfactory bulb sends it up to the brain for processing. I thought it would be fun not to talk about smell, because it turns out smell is such a basic sense that it's actually handled very much in your limbic system, not in your cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex part kicks in to identify the most identifiable scent as measured by administering different scents to adult humans and asking them to name what they smelled. Johnson's baby powder is the #1 most identifiable smell. The fact that you can impose a name like Johnson's baby powder on it shows that there's a lot of memory, right, expectation, experience that is imposed on our recognition of smell. So There's a lot of just this neurochemical stuff happening at a below consciousness level, and then there's the conscious part where you're labeling and imposing, your knowledge and expectations on it. So instead of talking about that, I thought it would be fun to tell you something interesting about this little structure that I put into this nose here, this little blue dot. If you can see, it's just right inside the nostril. I put a little blue dot. That is a dot in the position of what's called the vomeronasal organ, which is, we call it for short, the VNO. And its job is to detect pheromones. Up until about 40 years ago, researchers thought that one of the things that really distinguish humans from other animals is that we don't have a VNO, that we don't process pheromones as a source of information. But then somebody looked in a human's nose and said, well, if we don't have a VNO, what's this pit in all these people's noses? We all have one. So then that got researchers scrambling around trying to figure out, okay, if we have a VNO, do we detect pheromones? Do we do what all the other mammals in the world do, which is get information from other people's pheromone signals? So it turns out, yes, we do. But it's, this is some pretty new research, maybe 20 years old, that people have been looking at these things in humans. What they've found is that females, can detect the DNA overlap of potential males. They can tell whether that male is a relative or not. And they react very differently to the pheromone fluids of a male who's related to them versus one who's a stranger. Now, this is all very confusing because we have not distilled down human pheromones. What they do to get pheromone patterns is they have a person take a shower with unscented soap and then sleep in a white T-shirt that's, just 100% cotton, completely free of dyes and whatevers. And they sleep in that same T-shirt 2 nights in a row, put it into a Ziploc baggie, and bring it to the lab. And then other people sniff it. So it's very sophisticated research here. And what they've been able to determine on the female side is that females can tell relative versus not relative among men. When females are ovulating, they prefer the smell of the T-shirts. And it's not really even a smell; it's a feeling that is caused by that VNO. They react more positively when they're ovulating to T-shirts that have been worn by men who they don't know, who they're not related to. When they're about to start menstruating or when they are pregnant, they react more positively to T-shirts that were worn by relatives, by male relatives. So different parts of the menstrual cycle or reproductive cycles, women respond differently to men's T-shirts. On the male side, there's evidence that males react to the pheromones given off by women that give clues to women's reproductive status. So women who are ovulating, men will rate while being exposed to a T-shirt that they've slept in, they will rate women's pictures as more attractive while being exposed to the pheromones of ovulating women. The T-shirts of ovulating women. Men can detect the degree to which they're related to a potential woman based on this, just inhaling the molecules from their shirts. So the VNO seems to give us a lot of really interesting information about potential partners, things like that, information about the people that we're coming in contact with. So I thought you might find that kind of interesting because there wasn't much to say about smell otherwise. So I threw that stuff in just for fun. The last of these, we don't know very much about its senses, would be balance. Here's another picture of my nephew doing a balance. It's a vestibular sense. So what we're relying on here is structures in our head and in our muscles that give us information about where our head is, where our body is in space, so we can make adjustments. So here we are back to that cochlea with the semicircular canal sticking off the top. And now the semicircular canals are important. So you'll notice that there are 3 canals sticking off of the cochlea, and you have them on each side of your head, one in each ear. So one is in the forward-backwards plane, one is in the side-to-side plane, and one is in the horizontal plane. They're fluid-filled, and so as you tilt your head, the fluid in the semicircular canals moves and gives you information about where your head is in space. When you're walking, the semicircular canal fluids get jostled and give you information about your pace. If you start running, it's bigger and more frequent. And so the semicircular canals can give us a lot of information about our head and our body relative to the ground. Now, there are actually these little structures in your semicircular canals called otoliths. They're little bony calcifications that are sort of in basically round, but not perfectly round. They're kind of like stones that we generate. And we make them and they dissolve, and we make new ones and they dissolve. They also need to be lodged in their receptor sites in order for our bodies to know that we are in the position we think we are. If the otolith moves out into the tube, it can cause vertigo, where a person is feeling like the floor moved out from underneath them, or that they're tilted when they're not, or that they're swirling, things like that. So, and it can take like a month for that otolith to dissolve, and we can make a new one and hope it stays in the right spot. Your otolith can move because you were diving and it got jostled, or other kinds of rough things like that. They can also just sort of get dislodged through like a whiplash or something like that. There's now a treatment if you've got like chronic otolith in the wrong spot, and so you're having a lot of vertigo. There's a new treatment where the doctor rotates your head in a particular pattern to try and get that otolith back where it belongs. But it can really ruin a person's life having your otoliths in the wrong spot, that's for sure. All right, so let's wrap up this whole sensation conversation by acknowledging that your senses don't work in isolation. They work together. They interact with each other. So I'm going to just, as an example, use taste. And not say taste, I'm going to say flavor. If you only have those 5 tastes, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, how do you taste coffee? Or raspberry? How do you get that? Well, that's called flavor. That's not taste, that's flavor. To get that flavor, you have the smell of the thing, right? Coffee is like 95% smell, right? Raspberry, same thing, smell, plus those taste receptors, right? And like, for example, let's stick with coffee. It's complex. It has sour notes, bitter notes. You might put sweet in it. So there are a lot of different tastes that might get activated by coffee. Combine it with the smell, and you're going to say, I think that's coffee. The sight, you see the cup, and you see the brown fluid in it, or the, in my case, beige fluid, because I put so much stuff in it. So you see the sight of it, and you're like, coffee, I know what that is. And then there's the texture, the warmth, the liquidiness, whatever it is, right? Those things all come together to produce the flavor. So sight, taste, smell, texture, they all kind of, and you know what? I didn't even put sound on there, but pouring your coffee or it percolating, right? It brewing, those are certain sounds. You walk into the Starbucks and you have to smell, you have all the sounds going on, you see what you're seeing, you know what's coming, right? Those factors all come together. So there's no such thing as, an understanding of the world in isolation of the other senses. All of them work together. Which brings us to perception, which is a great time to move to another segment. So I will stop here and I will come back and talk about perception.